Loma Street was like any other small street in Lagos, alive with the sounds of people going about their daily business, children playing, and neighbors sharing gossip. It was a place where everyone knew everyone's name, and no secret stayed hidden for long. At every corner, people greeted each other with a smile or a friendly wave, and no one ever passed by without saying good morning or good afternoon. Among the familiar faces was Baba Uche, the elderly man who had lived on Loma Street for as long as anyone could remember. Every morning, he sat outside his small bungalow, his transistor radio playing softly as he sipped from his cup of hot pap. Baba Uche wasn't just another resident. He was the unofficial watchman of the street. If something unusual was happening, you could be sure that Baba Uche would be the first to notice and the first to spread the news. There was also Chaimo, a young woman who helped her mother run a small provision shop on the street. Chaimo was known for her quick smile and friendly attitude. She greeted everyone who walked past, and if you didn't greet her back, she'd call after you, "Brother, you know fit greet." At the end of the street stood a small food joint run by Mama Bela. Though new to the area, she had quickly become a part of the Loma Street community. From the day she arrived, her cooking had drawn in a crowd. Mama Bela, Sade, and Uedu were so good that people came from nearby streets just to get a taste. But as peaceful as Loma Street appeared, something strange was happening, something that nobody but the dog seemed to notice. Mr. Okla, who lived in the house right next to the Bela shop, had 3 large dogs. Normally, they were quiet and friendly, wagging their tails at familiar faces and barking only when strangers passed by. But ever since Mama Bela and her family arrived, the dogs had changed. Every time they passed the dog's gate, the animals barked fiercely, growling and pacing as though they were in the presence of something dangerous. At first, Mr. Okla thought it was just the dogs being protective of their territory, but soon it became clear that something was unsettling them. The more the family came and went from the shop, the more agitated the dogs became. For months after they arrived, Mama Bela's shop was the most popular place on Loma Street. From the early hours of the morning, the smell of hot Bela cooking on the stove filled the air, drawing people in like bees to honey. It wasn't just the food that people loved, it was the atmosphere. There was something comforting about sitting on the wooden benches outside the small shop, eating a plate of Bela with Sade and assorted meat while watching the world go by. Mama Bela was a short, plump woman, always with a smile on her face and a warm greeting for everyone who passed by. She worked alongside her 2 daughters and a young man who many assumed was her son. The girls were quiet, always working quickly and efficiently, while the boy handled the money and served the customers. Together, they ran the shop like a well-oiled machine. People from all over the area came to buy food. Baba Uche made it a point to stop by at least twice a week. He liked to sit on the benches outside, listening to his radio and enjoying his meal. Even Chaimo, who was always busy at her mother's shop, would find time to stop by and grab a plate. "This Bela is magic," she'd say, licking her fingers after every meal. Even though the family didn't talk much, people felt at ease around them. They never caused any trouble, and they kept their shop clean and tidy. It was the perfect business, and it seemed like nothing could go wrong. The food was soft and perfectly seasoned, and the customers were happy. But while the people of Loma Street enjoyed their meals without a second thought, Mr. Okla's dogs had a different opinion. Every time Mama Bela or one of her children walked past, the dogs would bark furiously, their sharp barks cutting through the air. They seemed to sense something that the rest of the street couldn't. "I don't know why these dogs keep barking at them," Mr. Okla said one day, shaking his head. "They've never acted like this before." His dogs were usually calm and friendly. They had seen the family every day for months, and yet their reaction never changed. Every time the family passed by, the barking started up again, as if the dogs were warning the street about something no one else could see. "If only these dogs could talk," Mr. Okla muttered to himself one evening as the dogs barked uncontrollably once again. But to everyone else, Mama Bela and her family seemed perfectly ordinary. They ran their shop, greeted their customers, and went about their business like everyone else. Nobody thought twice about it. However, as the days went by, something subtle began to change. The shop was still busy, but there was a growing unease in the air that nobody could quite explain. Little by little, things started to feel different. At first, the changes were so small that nobody really noticed. People still came to Mama Bela's shop, enjoyed their meals, and exchanged small talk as they ate. The joint remained as popular as ever. But slowly, something started to shift. The warmth that used to fill the small shop began to fade. And the family's behavior became more distant, more unsettling. It began with the greetings. Mama Bela had always been one of the most polite people on the street. Every morning, she would greet everyone who passed by her shop, her voice full of energy, her smile bright. Her 2 daughters and the young man who worked with her would always follow her lead, nodding and greeting the customers as they set up for the day. It was something that everyone on Loma Street appreciated. Greetings were an essential part of the culture. But one day, Chime noticed something odd. She passed by the shop on her way to the provision store as she always did and waved at Mama Bela. "Good morning, Mama Bela," she called out cheerfully, but this time, there was no reply. Mama Bela didn't look up, didn't smile. She didn't even seem to hear Chime. Chime frowned. Maybe she didn't hear me, she thought. So she tried again the next day. This time, the same thing happened. No response. Mama Bela's daughters, usually quick to greet, just continued with their work, their faces blank, their eyes avoiding contact with anyone who passed. It wasn't just Chime, other people on the street started to notice as well. Something had changed. And no one knew why. One by one, they began to whisper among themselves. Baba Uche, who sat outside his house every day listening to his radio, noticed the change too. "These people have stopped greeting," he said one afternoon, scratching his head. "Before, they would greet me every morning. Now they just walk by like they don't see me." "I thought it was just me," Chime replied. "I greet them every day, but they act like I'm invisible." At first, people tried to make excuses for them. Maybe they were tired, running a shop wasn't easy, after all. But the strange behavior continued. As the days went by, the family became even more withdrawn. They no longer spoke to the customers the way they used to. They served the food, took the money, and went back to their work in silence. Even when the shop was busy, the atmosphere felt cold, almost eerie, and the dogs noticed it too. If anyone should have gotten used to Mama Bela's family, it was the dogs. They saw them every day, heard their voices, and watched them move back and forth from the house to the shop. But instead of growing accustomed to their presence, the dogs seemed more restless than ever. Every morning, when Mama Bela and her children passed by on their way to open the shop, the dogs would bark furiously. Their growls were low and menacing, their barks sharp and relentless. It wasn't just one bark and then silence, it was continuous, as if the dogs were trying to send a message. A warning. "I don't know what's wrong with these dogs," Mr. Okla muttered one evening, shaking his head in frustration. "They've never acted like this before. Every day it's the same thing. As soon as that family walks by, they go crazy." It wasn't normal, and Mr. Okla knew it. His dogs had always been friendly and calm even around strangers. But something about Mama Bela's family was different. Chime, standing outside her mother's provision shop, watched the scene unfold one morning. The dogs barked violently, pacing back and forth behind the gate, their eyes locked on the family as they passed by. Yet Mama Bela and her children didn't seem bothered at all. They didn't flinch, didn't even look in the direction of the dogs. They walked silently to the shop, opened the door, and began their day as usual. "What is it with these dogs?" Chime asked, turning to her mother, who stood beside her. "I don't know, but it's not normal. Dogs don't bark like that for no reason." As the days turned into weeks, the whispers on Loma Street grew louder. People who had once adored the Bela shop now felt uneasy. The food was still as delicious as ever, but the warmth and friendliness that had once defined the place were gone. The shop was busy, but it felt cold, lifeless. Customers noticed that the family barely spoke to each other anymore, and when they did, it was in hushed tones, in a language nobody on the street recognized. "They're not Yoruba," Baba Uche said one day, speaking to a group of men gathered outside his house. "I've been listening to them, and the language they speak, it's not Yoruba, not Hausa, not Igbo either. I don't know what it is." The men nodded in agreement. It was another strange piece of the puzzle that nobody could figure out. As the mystery deepened, so did the tension on Loma Street. The dogs continued their relentless barking. People continued to whisper, wondering what had changed. Why had the family become so distant? Why were the dogs so disturbed by them? Was there something they were hiding? Nobody had the answers, but one thing was clear: something was wrong with the Bela cellars. The people couldn't see it, but the dogs could. And if only they knew what the dogs were trying to say. As the weeks passed, the unease on Loma Street grew stronger. Mama Bela's shop, once the bustling center of the neighborhood, still drew customers, but people spoke in hushed tones about the strange changes that had taken over the family. There was something odd about the way they lived, something that didn't sit right with anyone who paid attention. For one thing, people began to realize that Mama Bela and her family never seemed to leave the shop. At first, everyone had assumed they had a house somewhere nearby, that they lived like everyone else in the neighborhood. But as time went on, it became clear that the family actually lived in the small restaurant itself. The shop wasn't large, just a single room with a kitchen at the back, and it had no windows. Yet every night, after they closed up, the family would stay inside. And nobody ever saw them leave. It didn't make sense. Lagos was known for its sweltering heat, especially during the dry season. On nights when the temperature soared, when even the wind refused to blow, people on Loma Street would drag their mattresses outside, hoping to catch a breeze. Mr. Okla's compound was always filled with people sleeping in the open air, trying to escape the stifling heat inside their homes. But not Mama Bela's family. No matter how hot it got, they stayed inside the shop. They never come outside, Chime said one evening, standing by the gate of Mr. Okla's compound with her mother. It's so hot, and they stay inside that small shop like nothing is happening. It's not normal, her mother replied, shaking her head. Even me, I can't sleep in this kind of heat. The more people talked, the more they realized how strange the family's living arrangements were. The shop had no windows and no proper ventilation. Even during the day, when the sun was at its highest, the family would stay inside, cooking and working as if they didn't feel the heat at all. It was as though they were untouched by the things that affected everyone else on the street. And then, there were the dogs. Typically, dogs in the neighborhood grew accustomed to the people they saw every day. After a while, they stopped barking at familiar faces. I don't understand it, Mr. Okla said one afternoon, talking to a few neighbors who had gathered outside his house. My dogs have never acted like this. They should be used to that family by now. But every time they see them, it's like they're seeing strangers. It's not just your dogs, Baba Uche added, sitting on his usual chair. Dogs can sense things we can't. They're seeing something that we're not. The neighbors nodded in agreement. Everyone had their theories, but nobody could explain why the dogs were so agitated. The constant barking had become a daily routine. Every time the family passed by, the dogs would growl and bark until they disappeared into the shop. And even then, the dogs would continue to pace near the gate, uneasy and restless. The mystery deepened. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And why did everything about them feel so off? As the whispers grew louder, so did the tension. People still came to the shop, but they came with a sense of unease, as though something unseen was lurking just beneath the surface. The family's strange living conditions, the dog's constant barking, and the unfamiliar language all pointed to one thing. There was more to Mama Bela's family than met the eye, and while the people of Loma Street tried to make sense of it, the dogs kept barking. Whenever they saw any member of the strange family, their growls deepened, their barks grew sharper. Things went on like this until New Year's Eve, when something unexpected happened. The end of the year brought a festive atmosphere to Loma Street. The air was filled with the sounds of celebration, children running around with sparklers, families setting up chairs in front of their homes, and the smell of food wafting from kitchens as everyone prepared for the new year. As was tradition, most residents stayed up for the crossover into the new year, either attending church or celebrating with family and friends. But amidst the preparations, one thing stood out: Mama Bela's shop was still open late into the night. It was unusual. Normally, Mama Bela closed up around 9 p.m., but on this particular night, the lights inside the shop stayed on, and her family could be seen moving about, cooking and serving food to a few late-night customers. Some people on the street wondered if they were staying open longer to make extra money before the new year, but nobody questioned it. After all, Mama Bela's family had always done things a little differently. Mr. Okla, who had just returned from a New Year's Eve service with his wife, noticed the shop's lights still on as he passed by. "Ah, they're still open?" his wife asked, surprised. "Maybe they're trying to make some extra sales before midnight," Mr. Okla replied, glancing at the shop. However, something felt off. The dogs on the street, usually noisy and restless, were unusually quiet. Normally, they would bark at Mama Bela's family whenever they passed by, but tonight, they lay calmly in Mr. Okla's compound, barely lifting their heads. It was strange, but he didn't think much of it at the time. As the clock struck midnight, fireworks exploded in the sky, and the people of Loma Street cheered in celebration. There was laughter, music, and clinking of bottles as neighbors exchanged well wishes and made plans for the year ahead. But in the midst of the celebrations, nobody paid much attention to Mama Bela's shop. By the next morning, Everything had changed. When the sun rose on New Year's Day, the people of Loma Street were met with an unsettling sight. Mama Bela's shop, which had been lively just hours before, was now completely empty. The door was shut, the lights were off, and there was no sign of the family. It wasn't just that they had closed for the holiday, everything was gone. The pots and pans that were usually stacked outside had disappeared. The benches where customers used to sit had been cleared away. Inside, the shop was bare, as if no one had ever been there. I passed by there around 2 a.m. after the service, and they were still there, Mr. Okla said, shaking his head. But now, it's like they vanished. The first to notice was Chime, who had gone to buy Bela's shop that morning. Mama Bela, are you there? She called out, knocking on the door. No answer. She peered inside and gasped. The shop was completely empty. Heart pounding, she ran back to her mother's shop. Mama, they're gone. The shop is empty. Her mother frowned. What do you mean, gone? They're not there. Everything is gone. The whole place is cleared out. News of Mama Bela's disappearance spread quickly. Neighbors gathered outside the empty shop, whispering among themselves. Nobody saw them leave. No trucks? No cars? Nothing. Someone muttered in disbelief. Maybe they moved in the middle of the night, another suggested, but no one could explain how they had left without a single person noticing. There were no signs of a hurried departure, no footprints, no scattered belongings, no goodbye. As the days passed, the mystery deepened. The disappearance of Mama Bela's family became the main topic of conversation. Everyone had their own theory. Some believed they were ghosts. They pointed out the family's strange behavior, how they rarely greeted anyone, how they lived inside the shop without windows, and how they spoke a language nobody understood. Others thought they were running from something. Perhaps they had been hiding from their past, constantly on the move, and something had finally caught up with them. Baba Uche, the voice of reason, had a different theory. He believed the family might have been struggling with mental health issues. Maybe they needed help, he suggested. The way they kept to themselves, the way they lived. Something might not have been right. The neighbors nodded. It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't answer all the questions. One detail unsettled everyone: the dogs. For months, Mr. Okla's dogs had barked relentlessly at Mama Bela's family. They growled and paced whenever the family walked by, almost as if sensing something no one else could. But since the family disappeared, the dogs were calm. Not a single bark. It's strange, Mr. Okla murmured one afternoon, watching his dogs laze around. They haven't barked once since that family left. It's like whatever was bothering them is gone now. His words sent chills through Chime. Maybe the dogs knew all along, she whispered to her friend. Maybe they were trying to warn us. Weeks passed. Life on Loma Street slowly returned to normal. The once bustling Bela shop remained vacant, a silent reminder of the eerie disappearance. The street was filled with its usual noise and laughter, yet the mystery of Mama Bela's family lingered like a shadow. Chime, who had once visited the shop every day, couldn't stop thinking about them. Where had they gone? Would she ever see them again? Every morning, as she walked past the empty shop, she half expected to see the family return, but they never did. As for Mr. Okla, the behavior of his dogs still troubled him. For months, they had barked and growled at the family. Now, they lay quietly in the yard, as if nothing had ever happened. It had been months since the mysterious disappearance of Mama Bela and her family. The once bustling Bela shop stood abandoned, its doors shut tight, its windows coated in dust. Though life on Loma Street had returned to its usual rhythm, the empty shop remained an eerie reminder of the unexplained vanishing. Some people refused to walk too close to it at night, while others whispered about ghosts and unfinished business. Then one day, a man named Okla arrived in the neighborhood. He was an ambitious food vendor from a nearby town, looking to establish his business in a promising location. When he heard about the vacant Bela shop, he saw an opportunity. I heard the last owners left without a word, Okla said to the landlord as he inspected the space. But a good location is a good location. The landlord hesitated before responding. Yes. They disappeared suddenly. No one knows why. Some people say it was just bad business. Okla scoffed. Bad business or not, I'll turn this place around. He rented the shop and, within a week, cleaned it up, painted the walls, and set up new cooking equipment. By the time he was ready to open, the smell of fresh stew and sizzling meat once again filled Loma Street. The villagers, despite their unease, were drawn in by curiosity and nostalgia. Some were eager to taste a mala from this shop again. Others wanted to see if anything strange would happen. For the first few days, business was booming. Customers filled the small space. Kola was pleased. But then, things started happening. It began with a few customers complaining about sudden stomach pains after eating. One woman clutched her stomach in agony just minutes after finishing her meal. A young boy, usually full of energy, grew pale and weak after eating a small portion of the food. It must be something in the ingredients, Kola muttered to himself as he inspected his supplies. But everything was fresh. He always bought high-quality yams and vegetables. His meat was sourced from a trusted butcher. There was no explanation for the sicknesses. Then, his food started spoiling unnaturally fast. Bowls of soup that were fresh in the morning turned sour by the afternoon. Raw meat, stored in a perfectly working refrigerator, began to smell rancid within hours. Even the yams developed mold overnight. This doesn't make sense, he grumbled, throwing away another batch of spoiled food. This has never happened to me before. Customers began avoiding the shop. Word spread quickly that something was wrong. Ever since Mama Bela disappeared, that place hasn't been right, an elderly woman warned. Maybe they never left. Kola dismissed the superstitions, determined to make his business work. But soon, even he couldn't ignore the strangeness. At night, when he stayed late to clean, he would hear soft murmurs, whispers so faint he could barely make out the words. Sometimes, he caught shadows flickering at the edge of his vision, shadows that moved even when nothing else did. One evening, as he locked up, he heard the distinct sound of a pot clattering inside the shop. He turned sharply, the hairs on his arms standing on end. He had just cleaned up. There was no reason for anything to fall. Slowly, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The shop was empty. Everything was exactly as he had left it. But just as he turned to leave, he saw it, a dark, shifting figure in the corner. It had no clear shape, just an eerie presence that seemed to loom over the room. His breath caught in his throat. The air around him grew colder. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow dissolved. Kola didn't sleep that night. Determined to uncover the truth, Kola spoke to some of the older residents of Loma Street. "Tell me about Mama Bela's family," he asked a man who had lived there for decades. The old man sighed. They were different. Always kept to themselves. Some people say they had secrets, but no one ever really knew what those secrets were. What I do know is that their shop never had problems. Their food was always fresh. Maybe they had a gift. Or maybe it was something else. "What do you mean, something else?" Kola pressed. The old man's face darkened. A gift can also be a curse. Maybe the shop was never meant for another owner. Kola didn't believe in curses, but he couldn't ignore what was happening. The next night, he decided to stay late again, determined to face whatever presence lurked in the shop. He lit a small lamp and sat in the quiet darkness, waiting. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, around midnight, the temperature dropped. The flickering light of the lamp cast strange shadows on the walls. And then, he heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving inside the shop. His body tensed. "Who's there?" He called out. A low, whispery voice answered, but he couldn't understand the words. The shadows in the corner deepened, stretching unnaturally. The air became thick, suffocating. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, filling the space until they became an unbearable hum in his ears. Kola stumbled back, knocking over a stool. He didn't care about his business anymore. He didn't care about the money he had invested. He just wanted to get out. As he ran out of the shop, the last thing he heard was a single, chilling whisper, "You shouldn't have come." By morning, Kola had packed his belongings. He went straight to the landlord, handed over the keys, and said, "I'm leaving. Keep the rent. I don't want anything to do with that place." The landlord sighed, as if he had expected this. "You saw them, didn't you?" "They never left," Kola said, shaking his head. "They are still there." Word spread quickly that Kola had abandoned the shop. No one dared to take it over after that. Over time, vines crept up the walls, dust settled permanently on the counters, and the space fell into complete disrepair. No one walked too close at night, and children were warned not to play near it. The once beloved Bela shop had become a cursed place, a reminder that some mysteries should remain undisturbed. No one ever saw Mama Bela's family again, but their presence lingered, unseen yet undeniable. The people of Loma Street knew one thing for certain: some places should never be reopened, and some spirits should never be disturbed.